Okay, thank you for joining me on this video where today's topic is as follows. Fully remote versus hybrid versus 100% on-site. Now I put a poll out on my LinkedIn basically asking what everyone felt was the best overall outcome, and here are the results. Let me just make myself a bit smaller and slide me up there. Okay, now here were the results. So fully remote came in at 15%. 100% on-site came in at 8%, so that seems to be no one's choice anymore, well, other than 8% of people. And hybrid had the massive lion's share of 77%. Definitely seems to be the way people are going now. And the reason I'm doing this video is I want to basically put forward my argument, my opinion as to what I think is the benefits of each and which way I would go. And just to start off with which way I would go, where do I end up? Well, I pop up right about here. So I definitely think hybrid is the best option. However, if I had to go one way, I'd probably err on the side of 100% on-site as opposed to fully remote. And I'll get into why that is very shortly. So firstly, the reason I'm doing this video now is because the kickback has come. If we had COVID, this big event that pushed us all home, and slowly it's been trickling back. And in 2021, 1 in 7 postings, job postings on LinkedIn were for remote positions. In 2024 it's 1 in 11, so it's really creeping back, and companies have decided they want more people back in the office. The stats suggest that hugely, but I think there's this real line in the sand between employees and employers of we want to be at home more and we want you in the office more. So as a company, how can you leverage that to maximize, if you are bringing people back in, what can you do to make that most successful from a performance culture? So the second thing is, obviously this is highly contextual. It completely depends on your situation, who you've got in your company, how big you are, small you are, all these things. So this is just my opinion, and there are a few other conditions as well. But if you were to tell me, we want access to a much larger talent pool, therefore we are mostly remote and it suits what our requirements are, then great. Do you think? These are just my opinions on the next two factors. So the first one is on the assumption that you have a somewhat positive culture. There's quite a few points here that you can say, well, my manager's X, Y, and Z, which means actually that doesn't work at all. Let's just assume that the culture is somewhat good, or at least striving to have a good positive performance culture. And that is the second one, is you're looking to drive performance. Now that may sound a little bit silly. You might think, well, obviously we're looking for performance, but I'm talking more about, that sort of sales team startup where you're really trying to push on and exceed expectations. That's what I would call a real performance environment, as opposed to more of a proficiency environment. Take something like a restaurant where it's more about proficiency than it is about performance. You just need to do the job. So those are my provisos. So to get straight into it, so the first thing I want to talk about is this. So you might have heard the quote, you learn to drive after you've passed your driving test. And it's all about, well, you get taught how to technically drive, and then you go out on the road and you really see how to drive. And that's the same with employees in an environment. So the stat is 80% of employees learn more from peers than they do managers. Now, there are quite a lot of stats on this. This one backs my point up the best, so I've gone with the 80%, but on the whole, it was above 50%. Majority would suggest that we learn more from peers than managers. And even though our manager sets out how we learn and what we're going to learn, we pick up a lot from watching people around us, asking little questions. You might want to ask your manager that, so you might just ask the person to the left or the right of you. That's where we do the majority of our learning. So if you're in a remote environment, or you're remote for the majority of the time, you're really taking down the amount of time people have to learn off others. So it's going to take longer to onboard people in training, which obviously costs money down the line. So that's one point. And then you have the disturbance threshold. So this is something that I've coined. The disturbance threshold is how urgent or important something needs to be before you bother someone. Now, it's a lot higher at home. For you to reach out to someone on Teams, email, or get on a call to disturb someone remotely, it needs to be a bigger issue. Not in all circumstances, of course, but in an office, someone's right next to you, you can just say, oh, hold on a second, what was that? And you feel like it's very quick. Now, you might be thinking, well, actually, that really suits me, because I don't like being bothered every 5 minutes to answer a question. And you'd be right. However, the 30 seconds or 1 minute it might take for you to explain might save them half an hour, an hour's learning, which ideally we want to do. So that's the first thing. Now, the next thing is probably, I think, the most crucial point. And this is all around the relationships that we build. Now, take Alan. Alan works on a team with 2 people. And Alan has with these two people what I might call green relationships. So he really understands what they're good at, what they're bad at. He understands their strengths. He understands their weaknesses. He understands, because of that, what the opportunities that they will be good for are. He also understands the problems they're going to face, and he also understands the solutions. Now, someone did point out to me that this spelled out swaps, so I shall refer to it as swaps from now on. But with green relationships, we understand all these things. And the more we understand these things, the more cohesive the team is and understands what people can do and what they can't do. But not just his teammates. Alan also goes for lunch with two other people. And with these two other people, he also understands a lot of their swaps, because they talk about everything at lunch. They ask questions. They might even whine about their manager or other team members, but they understand what's going on fairly well. They have what's called green relationships. And there's an interesting study around this as well, which produced this called the Allen curve. And basically what this guy did is he was trying to study what these teams of engineers did, because there were loads of engineers competing on similar projects. Some were really successful and some weren't. And he wanted to go into it and look at, well, what are the factors? And he was looking at all these things. Like, did they all go to the same school? What did their parents do when they brought them up? These high-performing teams. And it turned out the main factor for teams doing well was how close they sat next to each other. Because when they were sat next to each other, they would just ask loads of questions, check each other, look at that, look at this. And it turns out that the frequency of communication drops off a cliff if you're over 6 meters away from the person. So if you're within 6 meters, you communicate all the time, and it's not linear. Once you hit that 6 meter mark, you can see it here, it drops off a cliff. That was one of the biggest factors. So as you can imagine, in a remote environment, it's much harder to build those cohesive teams that communicate all the time. Now, that brings me on as well, because if you're in a bigger company, yes, you can have these green relationships, but you can't have green relationships with everyone. You can't know everyone's strengths and weaknesses really well. So with all these other people, what do you do? Now, for this is what you want to really do is cultivate what I call orange relationships. So you don't have time to have green relationships with everyone, but you can create orange relationships, and you do that by creating collisions. And collisions is something a guy called Tony Hsieh, founder of Zappos, came up with. And a collision is basically person A talking to person B. When they talk to each other, that's a collision. And he would do interesting things, like if there were 3 entrances to the building, he would take out 2 of them, and then people would meet more on their way in. And what that did was just get something going, a conversation. It might just be hello. But what happens first, you get relationship building first, people, little hello, then it's, oh, how are you doing? Oh, what do you actually do? I've seen you around quite a lot. And it goes and goes and goes until you get to a point, relationship building first, knowledge sharing second. No one walks up to someone in an organisation and says, hello there, I would like to share some information about my team that I think could be helpful to you. That doesn't happen. First comes a relationship, you feel like you get on, and that's what you're doing here, is you're building orange relationships. And you can think of it really simply in the way of, if people meet more, so you can have coffee whenever you want, but everyone must have coffee at 9:30, because we know at that time we'll get loads of collisions. If there are lots of collisions happening, there's lots of relationship building, and then there's lots of knowledge sharing further down the line, more cohesive teams. And then think of it even bigger organisation, and you call your organisational capacity. So the more relationships you have between that organisation, the more likely it is for knowledge transfer, opportunities to be identified, cohesion. And as you can imagine, in remote environments, you're taking away a lot of these relationships, a lot of these conversations. So I'll move on as well, that the other problem you get in remote environments is what I call an agenda culture. So if you have a meeting, you will talk about what's on that meeting, or maybe a few little pleasantries, but after that, there's not much else. And there's 2 main forms of communication that happens in businesses, without sounding patronising, of course there is, but there's informal and there's formal. So the formal being your emails, your meetings, your Teams messages, and your informal being that, water cooler chats or coffees, lunches, the meeting after the meeting. So we've had the meeting as we walk out. What do you think of this? Do you think that was right? I'm not sure about that. All these little things. And the stats on this are very hazy. Some people say it's 50% of all communication in business is informal, not on official documents, and that ranges quite a lot, quite hard to, and quite contextual. So I haven't put a stat up, but it's a huge amount. I would imagine you can run your own business through that, how many conversations happen outside of those lines of communication. What I want to look at is in remote environments, the formal stuff still happens fairly well. You still have your meetings, emails, etc., etc. And in person, obviously, you have that as well. Now, the interesting thing is when it comes to the informal stuff. So In-person environments, you have all of that informal stuff as well. And if you have a really good culture, creating lots of collisions, you'll have even more. So more knowledge transfer, more relationship building. The problem with remote environments is you lose a lot of the informal conversation where little things are worked out. So you do the official stuff. You might not feel comfortable talking in a big meeting, but afterwards you might ask something valuable and then gets passed back. And it's not, in remote environments, you'll still have the green relationships that are informal. You might call your friend up after the meeting and say, what do you think of that? It's the orange relationships that you really lose in the remote environment that can be crucial. But anyway, moving on. So this is something that often gets thrown up when arguing for the work from home crowd is, if everyone hits their targets, why should we need them in the office? And it's a valid argument. If that suits you, fine. But I actually think it's a little bit of a misunderstanding of value. And I'll explain it like this, because take John here, who makes 100k in sales. And then you have Peter, who makes 150k in sales. Now, usually you'd look at that and go, okay, well, Peter is the more valuable person. And that's fine. However, what John does is he makes 80k in something I call sales by association. And this is, let's say, 8 other salespeople make an extra 10k by being around John, because John asks interesting questions, he gives them little hints about this and that, and he makes everyone better around him. And 8 other people make an extra 10k. And Peter has 0 SBA. No one gets better around Peter, but Peter looks good. Now, the problem with SBA, or sales by association, is it's very hard to calculate and will often be attributed to other people, i.e., John didn't make 80k of SBA, everyone else just made an extra 10k themselves. So it's a misattribution of value. Now, what I'm not going to tell you here is an ingenious way to calculate SBA. All I'm going to tell you is that in a remote environment, SBA pretty much disappears because people aren't feeding off each other and learning little tricks and getting better, rising tide, lifting all boats. In remote environments, it's very much you are siloed. So yes, you might hit your target, but you have to think of an overall team together could probably achieve more. And I talk about this in rugby terms as well. I once played with a guy who, every time I played with him, I played a lot better. He would talk to me loads throughout the week. He'd make sure I was clear on everything. And in the game, he'd encourage me, pick me up. And I played really well when I was around him. Now, anyone watching that game would look at it and go, well, Ross is playing well today. They probably don't see, well, that player is making him a lot better. And then another player came in who arguably had a much better career and individually was a much better player. But when he played with me, he barely ever spoke to me. I didn't play as well. Now, they would look at that as, that player is individually better, pick him. Ross, you've not played as well, so you're not being picked. They will have failed to realise that that other player was making 4 other people around him a lot better, and therefore the team was better. So it's a very simple idea, but when you're working remotely, that SBA pretty much disappears. So it's a slight misunderstanding of value. So I'm not saying, here's how you work out SBA, I'm just saying, in remote environments, you lose a lot of that type of knowledge sharing. Anyway, moving on. So one thing I want to really quickly touch on as well is I think the main areas we get social interaction are sports, family, religion, and work. Family and work being the 2 core areas where we get that interaction. And on the whole, social interaction in society is on the decrease. And I think it's a real opportunity with your work culture. If you can provide a really great culture with purpose and positive social interactions, the quality of your social interactions are one of the biggest factors for mental health. And I think you almost do your employees a disservice by buying into letting everyone work at home all the time, because also if you are struggling with mental health, you want to withdraw and work more from home. And I think it's in a society that is more and more increasingly siloed and less social interactions, religion dropping, more work from home, leisure centres being closed at a higher rate, etc. It is an opportunity to provide people with positive social interactions if you get your culture right. But just a little extra point there. So what? So what does this actually mean? So essentially what I would invite you to do is think, what actually fits our business? Because if you've got lots of new hires, you want those people to get up to speed as quickly as possible. Therefore, you want less work from home days. It will take them a lot longer to get on board, and therefore performance, etc., etc. So what actually fits your environment? If you've got people that have been there for years, you can probably move towards a more remote environment because there's not as much learning to be done. Provide clarity and hire based on your needs. The amount of companies or people I speak with that will introduce a policy and then they change it halfway through and people get all annoyed, be really clear up front with what you're looking for and hire based on that. Don't tweak it and change it because you'll run into problems down the line. So be really clear with why you're doing it and be deliberate. This is why we have our policy for X, Y, and Z. If you fit that, great. If you don't, no worries. The third one is this. So teams taking days off where possible together. So something called the Grand Vacances in France, where they would have 2 months a year where everyone generally takes holiday. And it's not great for the French economy, I'll tell you that. However, what they do report is everyone has far lower levels of stress when they take holiday in the Grand Vacances than at other times in the year. There's this element that when everyone is on holiday together, there's less stress, you're not missing out on things. Which is why I believe the best thing you can do is have everyone having their work from home days on the same day. If possible, if you have to have people on site, so be it. But the benefit you get there is that if we're all at home and we can plan for that, so we all take Monday at home and we can do all of our external meetings, get our admin done, there's a mindset shift that knows I'm not missing meetings, I'm not having to be caught up on things. Everyone's at home today, then we're all in at the same time. We maximise those collisions. We're not thinking, are they in today? Are they joining in via Zoom? Everyone's at home at the same time. You're going to maximise that capability. People can properly have that shift and also they can do a bit of life admin. They can put a wash on. They can go to the gym at a better time. They can do some meal prep, whatever they want to do. Because also they're going to be a bit happier if they're more organised at home. We can't just take their work factors for performance. There are loads of other things that affect performance, and being happier makes you perform better. So having that extra day where you can just switch off a little bit, probably beneficial. So I think even in those micro teams, if everyone can have that day off together, you can coordinate that, I think that's the best way to go. As many socials as possible. I think you need to maximise the amount of time that you spend outside of work as well to get to know that relationship building that then leads to better relationships in the workplace. Often happens outside. It's not just drinking events, it's anything where you can get together and talk about other things. So as many of them as you can, and then maximise that organisational capacity, create as many collisions as you can, little coffee breaks here and here. It might feel at the time like you're not getting the benefit, but over time it will prove dividends, and your culture and collaboration will be far higher. And then if I was actually to structure it, if I was going to do it, again, requires context, but I would look at maybe doing Monday, Tuesday in the office, Wednesday as many people as home as possible or as can be done, Thursday back in the office, then every other week I'd have that Friday at home with a social on that Thursday. So get everyone out, then you have your work at home the next day, every other week. For me, I think that works the best. You still get that balance while also maximising that organisational capacity. So if you have made it to the end of this video, I understand this is slightly longer than normal, but if you're really being clear with this, what should you be doing? Well, create a culture people want to be a part of. If you're asking people to come back into the office, you need to give them a reason why they're coming back into the office. We're not just bringing you back in because we don't trust you and we don't think you're doing what we want you to do at home. We're bringing you back in and we're going to maximise this by giving you a great culture that you want to be a part of. Second thing, provide complete clarity on your policy. Whatever it is, be completely clear, stick with it, and hire based on it. Don't tweak your fit and then have to be inconsistent with what you're doing. Be really clear on what you're looking for and go out and get it. And the third one is listen to your people. Ask around first before you just introduce and force it on people, and then explain why you're doing it and buy people into it. And if you create that culture, you're bringing people in, you're providing them with a decent environment to be a part of, and you're creating collisions as well, then I think you'll be on the right path. So again, like I say, thank you for listening in to one of my looms. I appreciate it. If there are any questions or thoughts, shoot me a message. Thank you very much.